Emily sat at the corner table of the small cafe, nervously running her fingers along the rim of her coffee cup. She had chosen this place carefully. Warm, cozy, tucked away from the busy main street. The walls were painted in soft cream tones, decorated with shelves of old books and potted plants, the kind of place that felt safe. Yet tonight, nothing about her heart felt safe. Her stomach fluttered as she glanced toward the door for the 10th time. She wasn't usually the type to agree to blind dates, but her best friend had insisted. "Emily, you deserve to be loved. Just try, please. He's a good guy, trust me." Those words had echoed in her head, as she got ready earlier that evening, standing in front of the mirror, for longer than she cared to admit. She had tried on 4 different dresses before settling on the navy blue one. It wasn't flashy, but it made her feel comfortable. She had styled her long dark hair into loose curls, and added a touch of makeup. Not too much, just enough to give her cheeks a soft glow. Yet, no matter how much effort she put in, Emily's eyes always returned to the same reflection: the curve of her body, the roundness of her face, the shape she could never seem to escape. Still, she had whispered to herself, maybe tonight will be different. The bell above the cafe door jingled, pulling her from her thoughts. A tall man walked in, scanning the room. Emily's heart skipped. This had to be him. She straightened her posture, forcing a hopeful smile as their eyes met. He approached her table, and for the briefest second, his lips curved upward in greeting. But then, his expression changed. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced with a flicker of surprise, then discomfort. He slowed his steps as if each one was harder to take. By the time he reached her, his smile was gone completely. "Emily?" he asked, his voice flat. "Yes," she replied, her voice soft but steady. She extended her hand politely. "It's so nice to meet you finally." He didn't take her hand. Instead, he sat down abruptly, glancing around the cafe as though hoping someone might rescue him. His eyes flicked back to her, and his mouth twisted into something between a smirk and a frown. "You didn't mention in your profile that you were this big." The words cut like glass, sharp and deliberate. Emily's chest tightened, but she forced a laugh, light and shaky. I didn't think my size needed to be the headline." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. "Well, it matters to me. I have certain expectations. And this." He gestured vaguely toward her body, not even looking her in the eye. "This isn't what I was expecting." Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry. The room around her seemed to blur, the sounds of clinking cups and cheerful chatter fading into a distant hum. She wanted to shrink into the chair, to disappear before the other patrons noticed the scene unfolding. But the worst part was, people had noticed. At the tables nearby, eyes darted their way. A young couple whispered. A group of friends stifled giggles. Emily could feel the heat of their judgment pressing against her skin. Her date sighed, already pushing his chair back. "I don't think this is going to work. Good luck though," and with that, he stood. No polite goodbye, no kindness to soften the blow. Just a careless exit, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor as he left her sitting there. The bell above the door chimed again, this time signaling the end of her hope. Emily sat frozen, her smile slipping, her eyes glued to the table. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced invisible patterns on the napkin in front of her. Inside, a storm of emotions raged. Humiliation, anger, hurt. But above all, a familiar voice whispered cruelly in her mind, "Of course this happened. Who could ever want you?" She closed her eyes, taking a slow breath, willing herself not to cry. Not here. Not in front of strangers. Still, a sting welled up in her chest. She had known rejection before. She had grown up hearing jokes, careless remarks, people laughing at her size. She had told herself she was strong enough to endure it. But somehow, sitting alone at that table, with his cruel words still lingering in the air, it felt different, it felt heavier. Her untouched latte had gone cold, a thin layer of foam clinging stubbornly to the rim. She picked it up, more to occupy her shaking hands than because she wanted it, and took a small sip. The bitter taste only deepened the ache in her chest. She forced her gaze up, pretending to check the cafe window. Pretending that she didn't care. Pretending that she hadn't just been dismissed like she was nothing more than an inconvenience. But the truth was harder. She cared deeply. She cared because all she wanted was what everyone else seemed to find so easily: connection, love, acceptance. And tonight, once again, the world had told her she wasn't enough. But what Emily didn't realize in that moment, as she fought back tears and tried to steady her breath, was that someone else had been watching. Someone who hadn't seen a too fat girl sitting alone, but rather a woman with quiet dignity in the face of cruelty. And for him, that said more than any appearance ever could. The cafe hummed with life. Cups clinked against saucers, steam hissed from the espresso machine, and laughter bubbled up from a table of college students near the window. To anyone walking in, it looked like a warm and ordinary evening. But for Emily, seated alone at her corner table, it felt like the walls were closing in. She shifted in her chair, clutching her phone like a lifeline, her thumb swiping aimlessly across the screen. She wasn't really reading the messages or headlines, she was hiding, masking the sting of rejection behind the illusion of busyness. If she looked distracted, maybe people would stop noticing her. Maybe they'd stop whispering. Her date's absence still hung heavy in the air, like a shadow refusing to leave. The chair across from her sat empty, its vacancy mocking her. Just minutes ago, she had envisioned a conversation there, smiles exchanged. Maybe even the beginning of something new. Now, it was only a void, a reminder of the words that replayed over and over in her head. "You didn't say you were this big." Emily pressed her lips together, her hands tightening around her phone until her knuckles turned pale. She fought to hold the pain inside, but her heart betrayed her. A single hot tear slipped from the corner of her eye, trailing down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, darting her eyes around, terrified that someone had seen. And someone had. At the table diagonally across from her, two young women leaned toward each other, their voices low but not low enough. One tilted her head slightly, eyes flicking toward Emily before she giggled behind her hand. The other raised her brows and whispered something that made them both snicker. Emily's stomach twisted. She looked down immediately, heat crawling up her neck. She hated this part, the constant awareness that people weren't just watching her, but judging her, dissecting her body as if it were a spectacle. She tried to steady herself. "Breathe, Emily, just breathe." She inhaled deeply, holding the air in her lungs until it ached, then let it out slowly. It was a trick she had learned years ago, when panic threatened to overwhelm her in public spaces. But tonight, the breaths didn't calm her. They only reminded her how empty the chair across from her still was. She reached for her coffee cup, hoping the warmth might ground her, but it had gone cold. The lat sat forgotten, a thin skin forming on top. She took a sip anyway, forcing the bitter liquid down her throat. The taste was harsh, but she welcomed the sting. At least it was something real, something other than the hollow ache in her chest. Around her, the world kept moving, indifferent to her small disaster. The barista called out an order. "Double cappuccino for Mark." Someone laughed loudly, their joy squilling through the air like sunlight. A toddler squealed in delight as his mother handed him a cookie. Life was happening, beautiful and ordinary. While Emily sat in the shadows of her own humiliation. She wondered, not for the first time, why she had even agreed to this blind date. She had known it was risky. That people often judged before knowing the first thing about her. But she had also carried a flicker of hope. The fragile kind that says maybe this time will be different. Maybe this time someone will see beyond what others refuse to look past. Now that hope lay shattered at her feet. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. It was a text from her best friend, Claire. "How's it going? Is he nice? Do you like him?" Emily's throat tightened. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of how to respond. She wanted to type the truth. "He walked out because of my weight." But the thought of spelling it out, of making it real in words, was unbearable. So she typed something safer. "Didn't work out. Heading home soon." She added a smiley face at the end, though her eyes stung as she sent it. The lie was easier. It protected Claire from worry, but more than that, it protected Emily from admitting the full weight of her hurt. Her vision blurred as another tear escaped. This one slipping quietly onto the back of her hand. She wiped it away again, quickly, pretending to scratch her cheek as if no one could tell. She tilted her head slightly toward the window, letting her hair fall forward like a curtain to shield her face. Through the glass, the city moved on. Cars rolling past, couples walking hand in hand, streetlights flickering to life against the growing dusk. To Emily, It felt like the world was pressing forward without her, as though she was stuck in place, tethered by shame. And yet, beneath all the heaviness, there was a small flicker of defiance. She whispered under her breath, so softly no one could hear, "Why am I never enough?" The question wasn't new. It had haunted her for years, echoing in fitting rooms, in doctors' offices. In moments like this when someone reduced her to nothing more than her body. But even as she said it, part of her knew it wasn't the whole truth. She was enough. She had always been enough. It was the world. The shallow, hurried, unkind parts of it, that failed to see it. Still, knowing that didn't stop the hurt. It didn't stop the loneliness of sitting across from an empty chair. Emily sighed and picked at the corner of her napkin, tearing it into tiny pieces. Maybe she should just leave, go home, crawl in her blanket, and let the tears fall where no one could see. That was the safer choice, the one she knew well. But for now, she stayed rooted to the chair, frozen by a mixture of shame and stubbornness. If she left too quickly, people would know. They'd know she had been rejected. She couldn't give them that satisfaction. So she stayed. Silent. Small. A tear threatening at the edge of her lashes, held back with all the strength she had left. And yet, in that silence, something unexpected was happening. A man at the next table, someone she hadn't even noticed, was watching. Not in the cruel, judgmental way she feared, but with quiet attentiveness. He saw her brush the tear away. Saw the way she pretended to scroll her phone. Saw the courage it took just to sit upright and breathe, when everything inside her wanted to collapse. Emily didn't know it yet. But her pain wasn't invisible. And soon, someone would remind her that her worth had never been defined by the cruel words of a blind date. Or by the laughter of strangers. But by the strength she carried even when she thought no one was looking. Emily shifted again in her seat, her knee bouncing nervously beneath the table. She told herself to stay just a few more minutes, then she'd leave. If she rushed out too soon, it would feel like an admission of defeat. But each second that passed seemed to grow heavier, as if time itself mocked her for hoping. Across the room, the hum of laughter and conversation continued. She tore another piece off her napkin, fingers working mechanically, eyes glued to her phone screen though she wasn't reading anything. All she wanted was to disappear. But someone had already noticed her. At a table just a few feet away, a man in a tailored charcoal suit set down his coffee and leaned back in his chair. He had come to the cafe for a quiet evening alone. A brief pause between endless meetings and business calls. For Daniel Carter, CEO of one of the city's fastest growing tech firms, life rarely slowed down. His days were filled with numbers, strategies, and people who only spoke to him because of what he could provide. But tonight, something had caught his attention. Someone. He had noticed her the moment he walked in, the woman with the navy blue dress, curls framing her face, eyes that kept flicking toward the door with nervous anticipation. He saw the way her posture straightened when a man approached her table, the tentative hope in her smile, and then, just as quickly, he saw it collapse. He hadn't meant to listen. But the cafe wasn't loud enough to block the man's cruel words. Daniel had heard them, sharp, dismissive, dripping with judgment. "You didn't say you were this big." The sentence lingered in his memory like poison. He had watched the man walk away, leaving her behind, her dignity crumbling in silence. Now, he watched her try to hold herself together, pretending to scroll her phone, brushing away tears as discreetly as she could. She wasn't making a scene, she wasn't demanding attention. She was enduring. And to Daniel, there was something profoundly courageous about that. He thought of all the boardrooms he had been in, the negotiations where men twice his size barked insults, and slammed fists against tables. He thought of the way most people crumbled when met with rejection or pressure. Yet here she was, sitting upright, holding herself together in the wake of something far more personal. He admired her strength. Daniel picked up his coffee cup again but didn't drink. His mind was wrestling with a decision. Should he say something? Or would that only make her feel worse? He knew what it was like to be stared at when vulnerable. He didn't want to add to her discomfort. But then he saw it, another tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, her hand trembling just slightly, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The sight made his chest ache. He couldn't just sit there. Taking a quiet breath, Daniel pushed his chair back and stood. The scrape of the chair against the floor made Emily glance up instinctively. Their eyes met for a brief second, hers dawdled, his steady and calm. He offered a small, reassuring smile before picking up his coffee and walking over. Emily's pulse quickened. Was this man about to tell her she had overstayed, that the cafe needed the table? Or worse, offer her some pity she couldn't bear? She instinctively braced herself, tensing as he approached. But instead, he set his cup down gently on the empty spot across from her and asked, "Do you mind if I sit?" She blinked, caught completely off guard. "Why, sure," she stammered, unsure what else to say. He sat, his movements calm and deliberate, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Then he looked her in the eye. Not at her body, not at the napkin shreds scattered on the table, but directly at her. "I'm sorry for interrupting," he said gently. "But I couldn't just sit there and pretend I didn't see what happened." Emily's cheeks flushed. Her eyes darted toward the exit, wishing she could run. "It's fine," she murmured quickly. "You don't need to." "No," he interrupted softly, his tone firm but kind. "It's not fine. The way he treated you, that was about him, not you." Emily froze. Stunned by the certainty in his voice, she opened her mouth to protest, to dismiss his words with the practiced self-deprecation she always carried, but nothing came out. Daniel leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "I've sat in a lot of rooms with a lot of men who think their worth is measured by how small they can make someone else feel. But strength isn't cruelty. Strength is what you showed just now. Holding yourself together, when someone tried to tear you down." Her breath caught. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. People usually offered empty reassurances. "Don't worry, he's just a jerk." But this man's words weren't hollow. He said them like he truly believed them. She shook her head faintly, her voice almost a whisper. "You don't even know me." Daniel smiled softly. "Maybe not. But I know what I saw, and I know you deserve better than what you just went through." For a long moment, Emily just stared at him, her heart thudding in her chest. She didn't understand why this stranger had chosen to sit with her, why he cared enough to say these things. But there was no judgment in his eyes, no hint of condescension. Only warmth. The tension in her shoulders eased, just slightly. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He extended his hand across the table. "I'm Daniel." She hesitated, then slowly reached out. Her hand slipped into his, and she was surprised by how steady his grip felt, how grounding. "Emily," she said quietly. He nodded, his smile deepening. "Emily. That's a strong name." She let out a nervous laugh, shaking her head. "You really don't have to do this, you know." Daniel tilted his head. "Do what?" "Sit here. Talk to me. Make me feel better." His expression grew thoughtful, and his voice softened. "I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm here because you deserve to be seen. Not overlooked. Not judged. Seen." The words sank into her chest like sunlight warming cold skin. For the first time all evening, Emily felt something stir inside her. A fragile sense of being worthy, of being more than the cruel dismissal she had endured. She blinked back fresh tears, but this time, they weren't born of shame. They were born of relief. For a moment, silence hung between them. Not the heavy, suffocating kind Emily had just endured when her date left, but something softer, steadier. Like the pause before a song begins. Daniel took a sip of his coffee, not rushing, not forcing her to speak. He simply waited, his presence calm and unhurried. Emily, still unsure what to make of him, shifted in her seat. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her napkin, the shredded bits scattered across the table like confetti from a celebration she hadn't been invited to. "Suh?" she finally said, her voice tentative. "Why are you really sitting here? Is this some pity thing? Because I don't need that." Daniel shook his head gently, his expression earnest. "No. Pity looks down on people. Respect looks across at them. I promise, Emily. I'm here because I respect what I just saw." Her brows furrowed. "Respect, for what? For being humiliated in public." He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table, his gaze steady. "For how you handled it. You didn't scream, you didn't lash out, you didn't crumble. You held your head high when someone tried to tear you down. That takes more strength than most people realize." Emily blinked. Caught off guard. She wasn't used to people framing her pain as strength. Most saw it as weakness, something to fix or hide. You really think that? She asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. I don't just think it. Daniel replied. I know it, I've seen powerful men fold under less pressure. But you, he paused, his voice lowering slightly, as if confiding a secret. You showed grace. That's rare. Emily's cheeks warmed, not from embarrassment this time, but from something she hadn't felt in years: validation. She dropped her gaze to her hands, unsure how to respond. To change the subject, she asked, so, what do you do? I mean, when you're not rescuing strangers at coffee shops. A faint smile tugged at his lips. I run a company. A tech firm, actually. Her eyes widened. A company. Like you're the boss. He chuckled. Something like that. The title's CEO, but most days it just feels like professional problem solver. Emily laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been hours since laughter had felt natural. That sounds exhausting. It can be, Daniel admitted. But it also teaches you things about people. Like how quick they are to judge. How often they mistake appearances for value. Her chest tightened at his words. He didn't say them with pity, but with understanding. As though he knew what it felt like to be underestimated. You know. Emily said quietly. I almost didn't come tonight. I stared at myself in the mirror for so long, wondering if I should just cancel. But then I thought, maybe someone will finally see me for who I am, not for what I look like. Daniel's expression softened, his voice gentle. And he missed that chance. That's his loss, not yours. Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but years of rejection had taught her otherwise. It's hard to see it that way. Feels like every time I try, it ends the same. Daniel studied her, his eyes searching hers. Emily. Can I tell you something I've learned? Success, real success, isn't about the doors that close. It's about the courage to keep knocking until the right one opens. The same is true for people. Not everyone will recognize your worth. But the right ones will, and when they do, they won't care about the things you think disqualify you. The words sank into her, slow and deep, like rain soaking dry earth. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, not even friends who tried to comfort her after heartbreak. This felt different. It felt sincere. She looked at him, her voice fragile. You make it sound so simple. He smiled. Simple doesn't mean easy. But, it's true. Silence stretched between them again, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. Emily realized her shoulders had relaxed, her breathing steadier than it had been all evening. The storm inside her had quieted, at least a little. Can I ask you something? She said after a moment. Of course. Why did you notice me? You could have just looked away like everyone else. Why care? Daniel held her gaze unflinching. Because I saw light. Even in the middle of your pain, there was dignity. Most people miss that because they're too focused on the surface. But I've learned the surface never tells the whole story. Her eyes stung again, but not with shame. With something closer to gratitude. She blinked rapidly, trying to keep the tears from falling, but her voice trembled when she spoke. Do you know how long it's been since someone said anything like that to me? He shook his head slowly. Too long, I'm guessing. Emily nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, too long. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a body, not as a collection of flaws to be tolerated, but as a person. Someone with value. With strength, with worth. Daniel leaned back, giving her space, but his eyes remained warm. Emily, do you know what I see when I look at you? She tilted her head wary. What? I see strength. I see heart. I see the kind of courage money can't buy. The words struck something deep inside her. She wanted to laugh them off, to deny them, but part of her longed to believe them. To hold on to them like a lifeline. Her lips parted, but no words came. All she could do was sit there, blinking through tears she no longer bothered to hide. Daniel didn't flinch at her tears. He didn't look away. He simply sat with her. Steady and unshaken, as though her vulnerability wasn't something to escape, but something to honor. And in that moment, Emily realized something profound: she wasn't invisible. Not tonight. Not to him. The cafe had thinned out by the time Emily and Daniel finally rose from their seats. The group of giggling friends had left. The young couple near the window was gathering their coats, and the barista was wiping down counters, readying for closing. Outside, The evening city glowed, streetlights flickering to life, cars gliding by in ribbons of red and white. A light drizzle tapping gently against the windows. Emily stepped out into the cool air with Daniel by her side. She hugged her cardigan tighter around herself, though it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was the realization that she felt lighter than she had in years. Not in body but in spirit. For so long she had carried shame like an invisible weight on her back. Every sideways glance, every cruel word, every rejection had piled on until she believed her worth was measured only by the space she took up in the world. But tonight, for the first time, someone had stripped away that lie. Daniel glanced at her, noticing the distant look in her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then let out a small, shaky laugh. "Honestly, I'm thinking that this started as one of the worst nights of my life. And somehow, it doesn't feel that way anymore." His smile was quiet but certain. "Funny how life works like that. Sometimes it has to break us a little before it shows us something better." Emily nodded, her throat tight. She wasn't used to talking about her feelings, not like this. But the words tumbled out anyway, fragile and unpolished. "You know, I thought if I just tried hard enough, dressed nice enough, laughed at the right times, maybe someone would finally see me. But it's like, no one ever does. They only see what they want to see." Daniel stopped walking. She slowed, turning toward him, startled by the intensity in his expression. "I saw you," he said firmly. "Not your dress. Not your body, you. I saw a woman sitting alone who had every reason to fall apart and didn't. A woman with strength most people wouldn't even notice, because they're too shallow to look deeper. That's what I saw." Emily's eyes burned. She blinked fast, but the tears spilled anyway, sliding down her cheeks unchecked. This time, she didn't bother to hide them. These tears weren't shame, they were release. She whispered, "Why are you being so kind to me?" Daniel's expression softened. He stepped a little closer, his voice low and steady. "Because kindness is the easiest thing to give and the thing the world seems to forget the most. And because you deserve it, Emily. More than you know." Her heart ached. But not with pain, with something fragile and beautiful she hadn't felt in years: hope. They walked a little farther until they reached the corner where Emily had parked her car. She stopped, fumbling for her keys. Suddenly nervous again. The night was ending, and with it came the fear that this moment, this rare kindness, would vanish as soon as she drove away. "Thank you," she said quietly, clutching her keys like an anchor. For sitting with me. For saying what you did. You have no idea what that meant." Daniel studied her for a moment, his gaze steady and warm. "Emily, don't thank me for telling the truth. Just promise me something." She tilted her head. "What? Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel small again. Not because of your size, not because of their words, not for any reason. The right people will see your light. Always. You just have to believe it's there." Her breath caught. The words lodged in her chest, filling a space that had been hollow for so long. She nodded, her voice trembling. "I'll try. That's all I ask," he said softly. For a moment they simply stood there, the drizzle softening into mist around them. Emily felt the world pause. Her heart, the traffic, the city itself, as though the universe was holding its breath with her. And then with a small, grateful smile, she said, "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Emily." His voice carried something steady, something reassuring, like a promise she couldn't quite name. She turned, unlocking her car and sliding into the driver's seat. But before starting the engine, she sat for a moment. Her hands resting on the steering wheel, her heart thundering in her chest. Tonight had started with rejection, humiliation, the kind of moment she feared most. But it ended with something she hadn't expected: kindness, dignity, hope. As she pulled away from the curb, she glanced in her rearview mirror. Daniel was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her car disappear down the street. And though she might never see him again, she knew this much. He had given her a gift no blind date ever had: the reminder that her worth was not defined by anyone else's opinion. Emily drove home that night with tears still on her cheeks, but her lips curved in the faintest smile. For the first time in a long time, the tears weren't heavy. They were cleansing, like rain washing away years of doubt. And in her heart, a single truth bloomed: she was enough. always had been, always would be. Because sometimes, all it takes is one act of compassion, one stranger's willingness to sit at your table. To remind you that light shines brightest where the world tries hardest to dim it.